No doubt you've seen the problem with hookup culture, you've seen the LGBTQ agenda, you've seen all sorts of sexual immorality running through our culture. Well, in this video, you're going to see Voddie Baucham expose the sexual revolution and how it rages against God's design. And at the end, I'm going to talk about what we as Christians can do to stand firm. Let's dive in.
There's the first step. The sexual revolution as a war against the sovereignty of God begins with a war against God as creator. Because if God is creator, then God is sovereign. If God is creator, he has the right to rule his creation. So if you are going to go to war against something that God has made, God has designed, and God has given, the first thing that you have to do is you have to somehow negate God's right to rule in whatever sphere it is that you're trying to rebel. And that's where we begin. Not with disagreements about whether or not the text truly says what we think that the text says. We may start off with that, but at the end of the day, where we're going is there is no God. Not just God hath not said, but there is no God to even say. We are the result of random evolutionary processes. And you people are fools because you have this book full of myths that have absolutely nothing to do with the way the world actually is. And you have duped yourselves into believing that somehow this collection of myths has some sort of moral authority, when the fact of the matter is we are God. We have the moral authority. So we are the ones who determine what human sexuality is. We are the ones who even determine what humanity is. We determine what a man is. We determine what a woman is. We determine what marriage is. And we determine it based on whatever our desires are at the moment.
One of the reasons that sexual ethics in our culture has changed so much, so quickly. I mean, just for example, when I was at school 15 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, there was nobody that was talking about how boys could become girls and girls could become boys. And now, if you say in a school that boys can't become girls and girls can't become boys, you get expelled. Like, that's such a massive shift in a short period of time. The reason for that is that our sexual ethics were rooted in a biblical worldview. You see, there are many people who would say, oh, separation of church and state, as a way to say that religion has nothing to do with politics or should have nothing to say about social issues. And the fact of the matter is, the political worldview going back through the generations, the social worldview going back through the generations, was rooted in, even if not perfectly, but was based on a biblical worldview about sex, about humanity, about ethics, a Christian worldview in these areas. And so with what Voddie Baucham is talking about, when people push God out of the way, so much of what is built on that biblical foundation comes crumbling down. So you've got many secular people, that you've got the Richard Dawkins types, who are literally scratching their heads thinking, wow, how on earth are people coming out with these, why is everybody sleeping around all the time? And why is abortion sky high? And why are people trying to change genders and whatnot? Well, it's because when you say there is no God, the things that a godly worldview give us also go. And that's what people don't recognize, but people are starting to wake up as they're seeing and feeling the consequences of this secular humanist worldview, especially when it comes to sexual ethics. They're realizing, maybe there was a connection between God and what we called normal.
That's where the war starts. And it is incredibly important to note. Listen, I'm glad that people are recognizing that much of the stuff we're dealing with today is a bridge too far. I'm just like you. I get excited when I see a video of some, parent standing up at a school board meeting and just giving them what for. I'm just like, yeah, give me all of that, right?
Yeah,
I
I'm here
love
for
it. I
that. I
love it.
love
I
it
love
too.
it. I love to
I'm
see
with
it. I
you.
do.
I'm with you.
But what worries me
Pay attention.
is that these people are going after fruit and not root. Drag Queen Story Hour is fruit, not root. Perverted books in the library is fruit and not root. Hiding children's gender identity proclamations from parents is fruit and not root. At the root of all of it is there is no God. Therefore, there is no moral standard outside of whatever we determine. It begins with a war against the Creator and His sovereignty.
And this is the thing. Because what we need to understand is when people reject God, we cannot expect them to be held to standards that come from God's word. When you reject God, at best you can say, I don't like the fact that you're trying to tell boys that they can become girls and girls that can become boys. I don't like the fact that there's an attack on masculinity and femininity. I don't like the fact that there's a breakdown in marriage. But you can't say that these things are inherently wrong and we need to stop them. You can't say they're inherently wrong and we need to pursue something better, because that person's just going to say to you, well, who makes you the judge? Who are you? Why is your opinion more valid than mine? Why is your opinion about sexuality more valid than my opinion about sexuality? And if they're just two people sharing their opinions, that's absolutely a valid question. What makes one person's opinion more valid than another? Nothing. So it's different from when we say, actually, we are created beings alike, but there is a God above us who created us and therefore tells us our purpose. How do you understand what a man is meant to be? You cannot understand your purpose and identity within yourself because you are a created being. You must have your creator tell you what your purpose is, tell you what you've been created for, and tell you therefore how to live. So we can talk about the social symptoms that we see. We could talk about the fruit, but unless we're dealing with the root, these things will not hold firm. It's funny, I did a video recently where I talked about Donald Trump implementing some of the policies to clamp down on the what he called transgender lunacy. The thing I noted is that many of those policies he'd actually made before when he was in office, like banning trans affirmation in the military. He'd done that before. And then Joe Biden comes into office and he just immediately reverses it. Why? Because when people think these are just your opinion versus my opinion, there's no weight to the decisions that are made. But when we understand that we are made by God and created by God, that when we believe that and when we bow down to that, when we surrender to that, that holds significant weight. That holds families together. That holds societies together. But what's really interesting is that the world is waking up to this. What's really interesting is that, as Voddie Baucham mentioned, there are parents who are standing up in the conferences, in the parents-teachers conferences, and saying, this is nonsense. Get these books out of our classroom. There are women who are realizing, wow, this hookup culture actually isn't the way forward. And maybe settling down with one guy who commits to protecting me is a better way forward. There are people who are waking up to this and seeing this. And so what do we do? What do we need to do as Christians as we see that? Now, there are some people who think all of this fight just has to be done on a policy level. All we need to do is implement laws that say, no, we're not going to put up with this. No to gender affirming care. No to puberty blockers. And there's definitely a place for that. There is most definitely a place for that. But one thing we know as Christians is that laws alone do not save. One thing we know as Christians is that by nature, we break laws. By nature, we break God's law. By nature, we break our own laws. So actually, it's not just laws that we need. It's a revival of the heart that we need. It's to be transformed and for people to be transformed so that they believe and trust in God. And so we as Christians want to see more than just law and policy. We as Christians want to see revival of the heart. And I believe that one of the ways we will see that revival of the heart is not only by standing up in those conferences and preaching and teaching, not only by that, but I think it actually begins in the home. I think it begins in the home with people who love Jesus, living faithful lives so that they will shine their light in our homes, with our family, with our friends, in our neighborhoods. And then as people who live in this world around us that's crumbling see us, they will see us and they will give glory to our Father in heaven. They will see our good works and they'll give glory to our Father in heaven. And that's exactly what Jesus tells us in Matthew 5, that we are first and foremost to live good, godly lives so that as people see us, like just imagine it. You're living a good, godly life. You're a man who's loving your wife, and your friend who's currently in the midst of a divorce sees that in you and learns what forgiveness looks like. You're as a father, you are investing time in your sons and your daughters. You're teaching them how to be good boys and good girls that grow up to be godly men and godly women. And then their friends see that. Their friends who are struggling with gender dysphoria, their friend Jimmy who thinks he's Juliet, sees that, and they see loving masculinity, loving femininity, and he realizes that going down the puberty block away is not the solution. This, I believe, is what we need to begin focusing on, so that when it comes to the policy level, when it comes to those parent-teacher conferences, and we're then pushing back on the madness that we see, people are able to see a better vision in our lives, a vision that looks like Christ, because we've been made to glorify and honor Christ and serve Christ. So I want to encourage you, as we deal with the effects of secular humanism, the sexual revolution, and as we try and do what we can to put a stop to how our society is breaking down. And best believe the breakdown of marriage is the biggest breakdown in our society, because it affects everything. Politically, economically, socially, spiritually, everything. We need to deal with that. Absolutely. It begins with loving God with all our heart, all our soul, all our strength, all our mind, and loving our neighbors as ourselves. And we begin with the neighbors in our homes. We begin with the neighbors in our communities, so that God will transform our society the same way that he has done before. The same way that he has done before. God is able to create revival in the heart and revival in societies, even when there isn't the public policy to back it, because God is sovereign.